Welcome to Code Corner. This is a video series we do at Mayfield Renewables where we talk about codes and standards as they relate to solar and solar plus storage installations. And today we're going to put a focus on the 2023 National Electrical Code and power studies. And this was really a discussion that we had in one of our longer form webinar series, our Ask Mayfield Anything. And so if you'd like to learn even more information, we had a great conversation talking about that. But this is something that's coming up more and more in especially our storage installations, having to do some of these studies and understanding what the fault scenarios are, what the arc flash requirements are, because code has some generic requirements for those early on in code, but then there's also some very specific sections in 706, for example, that talk about it. So we'll point those out and kind of talk about what you're going to get from those and why they're so important. So first off, we are looking at, this is a list of the codes that are, talk about different ways of doing power or different power studies that are required. And so by no means is this an exhaustive list, but just kind of wanted to point out that, early on in 110, we have a couple sections there that talk about doing arc flash and fault current measurements or calculations, I should say. And then we get into 240 with breaker coordination. The 700s, we start talking about some more breaker coordination things. And then 706, this is in 2023. We have these fault current and arc flash requirements for our disconnecting means. And then in 712, that's DC microgrids, which is a 2020 reference. In 2023, 712 actually got removed. But if you're still working in 2020, that's something that you should look at and understand. There's some fault current requirements there as well. So again, just not trying to give you every single code reference that's out there as it relates to these different studies that are required and that you're going to have to do, but rather just putting them out there. So National Electrical Code, and then in NFPA 70, which is National Electrical Code, there's references to 70B and 70E in these informational notes around these codes, around these sections. So take your time, go look at those. I encourage you to take a look and understand for your installations what some of those requirements are going to be. So kind of going through that list, 110.16 was talking about arc flash requirements. And so, one of the things that's required for our installations, and this is commercial, this is explicitly, they being the code making panels, don't require this to be done on the residential and 1 and 2 family dwelling applications. So this is commercial industrial type applications where we're going to see these, but we need to be able to assess what the hazards are for our battery systems, our DC systems. And what we're going to be able to do is assess those situations, run through some calculations using some specialized software, and informing the users, right there on site. You're going to have these labels, and it's going to indicate what the personal protective equipment is that you need to be wearing because of the arc flash that's available. So you'll see some level, what your hazard risks are, what those calorie levels are. So it gives the electricians on site, the maintenance staff on site, when they're going and working on these systems, they understand when they open that door up what kind of risks they're going to be at, and so they can put on the proper PPE in order to protect themselves appropriately. And so because of our systems are relatively unique, these are not, AC systems we have different hazards, we have different ways of calculating this than on DC and AC systems. So with our DC systems, we need to look at these short circuit events under those scenarios. The DC electricity is going to act differently than the AC. So we need to make sure that we are calculating for that and accounting for it such that we're keeping the people who are using these systems safe and free of being exposed to hazards that they shouldn't necessarily be exposed to. Another thing that we look at as part of these power studies is breaker coordination. So this gets into the 240.12 requirement that I showed you earlier. This gets into those 700 and the 701 requirements. And what we're looking to do here is, we're calling protective device coordination, or PDC. And what this is going to do is it's going to help coordinate the breakers. If you have a fault scenario, this will help you coordinate the breakers with their settings and with what their requirements are, such that if you do it properly and you have it coordinated, have those breakers coordinated in the right sequence, when you get a fault. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we have kind of this, you'll see this in the enhanced content of code as well, in National Electrical Code. But what you see on the left-hand side, the very far left-hand side there, is you have a fault down at the bottom. You have some sort of fault at the end of the line, if you will. And if you aren't coordinated right, then every disconnect, every overcurrent device upstream of that could potentially blow, and you could have a completely down electrical system. Your entire service could be out because of the way that those breakers were put in place and they were not coordinated, as opposed to the system on the right hand side there, where you have that same fault, you have that same situation, but it's just the first upstream disconnect, the first upstream device is protecting it, and the rest of those loads are able to continue to run because there was no faults there, and so they're able to continue. So this becomes pretty important when we start talking about our commercial systems and being able to apply those. So breaker coordination is just another part of what we're looking at there. And then as it relates directly to our ESS installations, 706.15 paragraph C talks about notification and marking. And so you see here on the list, we have 4 items that we have to include on our disconnecting means. And so we see the available fault current, we see an arc flash label with using acceptable industry practice, date it was performed. So again, commercial and industrial, this is not required on 1 and 2 family dwellings, but this is the information you need to be able to calculate, be able to present, and have the proper labels generated and placed on that equipment. So finally, just kind of wanted to wrap it all up and talk about here at Mayfield Renewables, this is a service that we provide. We're doing this more and more with our clients as we're seeing that the need is arising as more energy storage systems come on. This is not a new thing in code, but it is for our industry. We are applying this in ways that we hadn't previously. So, doing things like thermal ampacity, and then, so those are the images you're seeing there on the right. Doing some calculations based on you have conductors in underground. How are they going to heat up based on the soil that they're placed in, the arrangement that they're placed in, things like that. So comes into play with the conductor ampacity. How big do the conductors need to be, and all of these things come into play. So that's part of doing these studies and looking at those, as well as the short circuit, the arc flash that we talked about, and of course those coordination studies. All right, so if you're looking for some extra support on power studies, our engineering team would love to talk to you and see if we can support you on your next project. So feel free to send us an email or visit us at mayfield.energy.